The gelding was 3 seconds away from the knockout pen when Dakota saw the brand, not the fresh one on his right hip, the BLM mark that meant he'd been deemed surplus, unwanted, destined for the Mexican trucks that everyone at the Toowoomba sale yards pretended not to see. No, she saw the old brand, faded but unmistakable on his left shoulder. A mark she'd only ever seen in photographs her mother kept hidden in the back of her closet. R.S. Riverstone, her father's station, the property that burned 15 years ago, taking him with it. The auctioneer's voice cut through her shock. Last call on lot 247. Chestnut gelding, 15 hands, no papers, sold as is. Wait. The word ripped out of her before she could think. I'll take him. Dakota Wells was 21 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, she didn't know her father raised horses. She knew he'd owned Riverstone Station in central Queensland. She knew he died in the Black Summer fires when she was 6. She knew her mother sold everything and moved them to Brisbane, married a banker named Roger, and never spoke about the outback again. What Dakota didn't know was that her father, William Wells, had spent 20 years breeding Australian stock horses. Tough, intelligent working horses descended from the first whalers that built this country. She didn't know he'd created a bloodline so respected that station owners across 3 states paid premium prices for horses that carried Riverstone genetics. She found out by accident. 3 weeks ago, she'd been cleaning out her mother's garage when she found a box labeled, "Will's Papers Do Not Open." Of course she opened it. Inside were registration documents, breeding records, sale receipts, and photographs of the most magnificent horses she'd ever seen. Bays and chestnuts with intelligent eyes and powerful builds, horses that looked like they could work cattle all day and still have energy to spare. In every photo, a man she barely remembered, tall, weathered, smiling with his hands on a horse's neck. Her father. The last entry in the breeding journal was dated December 2009. River's dance queen bred to Stockman's Pride. Foal expected May 2010. 4 months before the fires came. 4 months before her mother became a widow, and Dakota became a girl without a father. The foal would be 15 now, the same age as the chestnut gelding currently being loaded onto her borrowed trailer by a stockyard worker who thought she was insane. "You sure about this, love?" The worker eyed the gelding's scarred legs, his dull coat, the way he stood with his head low like he'd given up expecting anything good. "He's not worth feed money. Half-starved, probably got worms, and mean-looking to boot." "I'm sure." Dakota signed the purchase slip with shaking hands. $400 she didn't have. $400 charged to a credit card that was already maxed out from university fees and her shitbox car's latest breakdown. But she couldn't leave him here, not when he carried her father's brand. Not when he might be. She didn't let herself finish the thought. The odds were impossible. One horse among thousands, 15 years after the fires, showing up at a Queensland sale yard on the exact day she happened to be driving past. Except he had the brand. And he was the right age. And when she looked at his face, she saw something in the shape of his head, the set of his eyes, that matched the horses in her father's photographs. The first thing Dakota did when she got him home to the adjustment property she'd begged to borrow from her university professor was call every veterinarian within 50 kilometers. The second thing she did was text her mother a photo of the brand. Her mother didn't respond. Dr. Melissa Frost arrived within 2 hours, took one look at the gelding, and said, "Darn, he's been through hell." She wasn't wrong. Beyond the obvious starvation and neglect, the gelding had scars across his legs from barbed wire, a badly healed fracture in his tail, and teeth worn down from years of poor feed. His hooves were cracked and overgrown, his muscles wasted, his eyes dull with resignation. "Can you scan him for a microchip?" Dakota asked, holding her breath. Dr. Frost ran the scanner over his neck. It beeped. Dakota's heart stopped. Got one. Dr. Frost read the number, then pulled out her laptop and logged into the national database. Her eyes widened. Well, I'll be damned. What? This is Riverstone's Last Dance. Registered Australian stock horse, foaled May 2010, bred by William Wells of Riverstone Station. She looked at Dakota sharply. Your father? Dakota couldn't speak, just nodded. Then this horse is... Dr. Frost checked her screen again. This is the last foal born on Riverstone before the fires. His dam was River's dance queen, his sire was Stockman's pride. Both champion working horses. This gelding's genetics are... She trailed off, staring at the broken animal in front of them. He should never have ended up in a knockout pen. The story came out in pieces over the following weeks, assembled from registration records, auction house receipts, and phone calls with people who remembered William Wells. River's Last Dance, dancer Dakota started calling him, had been born 4 months before the fires. When the flames came through in January 2010, William had been evacuating his horses. He'd gotten most of them out, loaded onto trucks and trailers, sent to adjustment properties across the state. But the fire moved faster than anyone expected. William was loading the last group, including the 4-month-old foal and his dam, when the flames jumped the firebreak. A neighbor, driving past on the main road, saw William's truck with horses already loaded, and William running back toward the barn. The neighbor stopped, ran toward the property, and found William collapsed from smoke inhalation near the stable. He dragged William toward safety, but the older man pushed him away, gasping one word, horses. The neighbor made a choice. He ran to the barn, found 3 horses, including the foal and his dam, and loaded them into William's truck. By the time he got back to where he'd left William, the fire had taken him. The horses he'd saved, including Dancer and his dam, had been among the last William Wells ever touched. They'd been sold at auction by Dakota's mother 3 months later. Everything had to go. The insurance money wasn't enough to cover the debts. The property was destroyed. They had to start over. Dancer had been bought by a station in western Queensland, then sold again and again. 12 different owners in 15 years, each one seeing a difficult horse, a horse that wouldn't settle, wouldn't bond, wouldn't trust. What they didn't see was a horse who'd lost his father, the man who'd brought him into the world in fire and smoke and chaos. A horse who'd been ripped away from everything he knew before he was old enough to understand it. Dakota understood that feeling. She'd lived it herself. Her mother finally called on day 6. Sell the horse, Dakota. No. You can't afford to keep him. You're at university. You're broke. You don't even know how to... Dad knew how. The words came out harder than Dakota intended, and he left me everything I need to learn. Silence on the other end. Then, that life is gone. Your father's dreams died with him. Don't torture yourself trying to resurrect them. Is that what you did? Just let it all die? I survived. Her mother's voice cracked. I kept us alive, Dakota. That's what mattered. He had 30 horses when he died, Mom. 30. What happened to the other 29? Another long silence. I don't know. I sold them. I didn't keep records. I needed them gone. After her mother hung up, Dakota sat in Dancer's paddock and cried for the first time since finding him. Not just for him, but for her father, for her mother, for all the loss that had rippled through their family like poison in water. Dancer walked over, slowly, carefully, still learning to trust, and rested his muzzle on her shoulder. We're going to find them, she told him, every single one. The search consumed her. Between university lectures and shifts at the campus cafe, Dakota tracked down every Riverstone horse she could find through registration databases and breed association records. What she discovered stunned her. Her father's horses hadn't just survived, they'd thrived. Riverstone's Maggie May was now the foundation mare for one of Australia's most successful stock horse breeding programs. Her offspring had won championships from Tamworth to Darwin. Stockman's dream was competing at the highest levels of camp drafting, had been featured in Australian Stock Horse magazine, and had a waiting list of people wanting to breed to him. Riverstone's Southern Cross had been exported to America, where she was teaching natural horsemanship and had become a social media sensation with over 300,000 followers. And Dancer's full sister, River's Last Song, was training young horses for the Australian Stock Horse Performance Team. She'd produced 6 foals, all of them champions. William Wells's bloodline hadn't just survived the fires, it had spread across the country, producing some of the finest working horses in Australia. As Dakota dug deeper into her father's breeding records, she began to understand what made his horses so special. William hadn't just been breeding for looks or even performance. He'd been preserving something essential to the Australian stock horse breed itself, a genetic legacy that went back to the horses that built the nation. The Australian stock horse, she learned from her father's meticulous notes, descended from the whaler horses that had carried soldiers through wars, explorers across deserts, and stockmen across the harshest country on earth. These weren't just pretty horses. They were survivors, bred for intelligence, endurance, and an almost uncanny ability to think 3 steps ahead of the cattle they worked. Her father had written in one journal entry, "The stock horse has to have heart, not just physical stamina, but mental toughness. They need to work all day in 40-degree heat, navigate rough country, anticipate a cow's movement before the cow knows it herself. You can't train that. You can only breed for it and hope." Looking at Dancer, even in his current state, Dakota could see what her father meant. Despite 15 years of neglect and abuse, despite 12 different owners who'd written him off as difficult, there was still intelligence in those eyes. Still, that particular awareness that said this horse was thinking, processing, remembering. Dakota started making calls, reaching out to owners, introducing herself, explaining who she was and what she'd found. The responses floored her. "I always wondered about the Riverstone horses," said the owner of Maggie May. "Your father was a legend. People still talk about his eye for horses. I'm sorry you lost him. Southern Cross changed my life," wrote the American trainer. "She taught me more about horsemanship than 20 years of clinics. Your father bred something special." But it was a call with an old stockman named Jack Hennessy that really opened Dakota's eyes to what her father had achieved. "Your dad understood something most breeders forget," Jack told her. "The stock horse isn't just one thing. It's the product of 200 years of Australian horsemen breeding for what works. You've got thoroughbred blood for speed and refinement, Arab for endurance and hardiness, a touch of draft horse for bone and temperament. Your father studied the old bloodlines, traced them back to the original imports, and bred horses that carried the best of everything." "I found his notes about that," Dakota said. "He had charts going back generations." "That's because he wasn't just breeding horses, he was preserving history. The Waller breed is mostly extinct now, but those genetics live on in horses like yours. The same bloodlines that carried men through the Boer War and World War I, that crossed the Nullarbor when there were no roads, that worked cattle in country that would kill a soft horse in a week." Jack paused. "Your Dancer, he's got that in him. His dam's line goes back to a mare named Riverstone's Echo, and her great-great-grandsire was a remount stallion that came back from the Middle East in 1919. That horse survived the war and then worked cattle for another 15 years. That kind of toughness doesn't breed out, it just waits." After the call, Dakota sat with Dancer and thought about what Jack had said. This horse, standing quiet in his paddock, carried the genetics of horses that had survived wars and droughts and the harshest continent on Earth. No wonder 12 owners couldn't break his spirit. He came from a line that didn't know how to quit. One by one, the owners sent photos and videos. Sleek, powerful horses working cattle with the intelligence and athleticism William had spent 2 decades selecting for. Horses that moved with a particular grace, that thought 3 steps ahead, that worked with their riders instead of against them. The Riverstone bloodline was everywhere. Dancer's transformation happened slowly, the way all healing happens. With proper feed and veterinary care, his ribs disappeared under healthy muscle. His coat began to shine, revealing the rich chestnut color that had been hidden under dirt and neglect. His eyes brightened. The gelding who'd stood in the sale yard with his head down, waiting for death, started to lift his head when Dakota approached. Started to nicker when he heard her car. Started to trust that good things could happen. She spent hours with him, learning from the training notes in her father's journals, studying videos of Riverstone horses, teaching herself the horsemanship her father would have taught her if he'd lived. And Dancer taught her patience, how to read the smallest signals, how to wait for trust instead of demanding it, how to build a partnership instead of enforcing obedience. Dr. Frost visited regularly, documenting Dancer's recovery. "You know what's remarkable?" she said one afternoon, watching Dancer move around the paddock. "Stock horses have this incredible ability to bounce back. I've seen it before. They can be neglected to the point of death, and with proper care, they come back stronger. It's bred into them, that resilience." She pulled out her laptop and showed Dakota a graph. "See this? It's a study on genetic diversity in Australian horse breeds. Stock horses rank among the highest for genetic health because breeders like your father maintain diverse bloodlines instead of inbreeding for specific traits. That diversity means they're less prone to hereditary issues and more adaptable to stress." "Dad wrote about that," Dakota said. "He refused to line breed even when it was fashionable, said it made horses fragile." He was right. Dancer's recovery speed isn't just luck. It's genetics. His body knows how to heal because his ancestors were selected for survival, not show ribbons. 6 months after she found him, Dakota rode him for the first time. Just bareback in the paddock, walking in circles. But when he moved beneath her with that smooth, ground-covering stride that every Riverstone horse had, she felt something click into place. This was her father's legacy. Not the station that burned or the breeding program that ended, but this, the way a good horse moved, the partnership between human and animal, the bloodlines that carried forward despite everything. She started working cattle with him, just a few head borrowed from a neighboring property. Dancer moved like he'd been born to it, which, in a sense, he had. The stock horse had been bred for over 2 centuries to do exactly this: read cattle, anticipate movement, work all day without losing focus. Watching him work, Dakota understood why her father had been so respected. Dancer wasn't just well-trained. He was instinctively good at this, the way a border collie was instinctively good at herding sheep. Generations of careful breeding had hardwired these abilities into his DNA. Dancer only lived for another year, a year where he taught Dakota everything her father would have taught her if he'd lived. How to work cattle, how to read a horse's mind, how to honor the partnership between species that built this country. When he died, peacefully in his paddock at age 16, she buried him on the property that was now hers, a small acreage outside Brisbane that she'd saved for and bought with money from her first real job as an equine journalist. The marker read, "Riverstone's Last Dance, 2010 to 2026, the last son of Riverstone who came home." But that's not the end of the story, because Dakota had tracked down River's last song, Dancer's full sister, and her owner had offered her first pick of her next foal. "Your father started something that shouldn't end," the owner told her. "Bring it forward." The foal arrived last spring, a filly, bay with a white star, with her great-grandfather's intelligent eyes and her great-grandmother's powerful build. When Dakota first saw her, just hours old and already standing steady on long legs, she thought of everything her father had worked for, everything he died trying to save. She registered her as Riverstone's new Dawn. The filly carried bloodlines that traced back to the horses that crossed the Blue Mountains with the first explorers, that worked cattle across the Channel Country, that carried the Australian light horse through the deserts of the Middle East. She carried her great-grandfather's intelligence, her dam's athleticism, and somewhere in her genetic code, the memory of a man who'd understood that some things were worth preserving, even at the cost of everything. Dakota started a breeding program with Dawn as the foundation mare. Small, careful, focused on temperament and working ability, rather than show success. She used her father's journals as a guide, selecting stallions based on bloodlines and proven performance rather than fashion. Word spread. People who remembered William Wells, who'd bought his horses or competed against them, started reaching out. They wanted to breed to Dawn, wanted to bring Riverstone genetics into their own programs. The name that had disappeared 15 years ago was being spoken again with respect. Her father built something that outlasted him. Now Dakota was building something that would outlast her. The Riverstone bloodline didn't die in the fires. It scattered, survived, and flourished. And it came home. If this story moved you, share it with someone who understands that some legacies are worth saving, no matter how broken they seem. Subscribe for more stories from the horse world, where love and loss create something beautiful.